ranking new movies released in June from worst to best. Now, I'm not gonna lie, 2025 has been a pretty bad year for new movies so far, but we finally got some bangers here in June. Unfortunately, Megan 2.0 was not one of them because this film was an absolute disaster. If you didn't know, the first Megan's like this kind of spoof horror movie focusing on this AI robot, and the sequel for some reason is just a full-on sci-fi action film. When this movie actually leans into the comedy, it's actually pretty funny, but it takes itself way too serious. There's not enough Megan. This is just a stupid movie overall. At number 9 is a new Sydney Sweeney movie, Echo Valley. This kind of dropped out of nowhere on Apple TV. It's about this girl Claire and her mother Kate, and one day Claire comes back to her mom's house covered in blood, and there's kind of this whole mystery that unravels. The movie is all over the place. The tone is so uneven. In 8th place is Materialists. This is a new rom-com without any com, starring Dakota Johnson, Chris Evans, and Pedro Pascal. Now, I actually think this is probably Chris Evans' best career performance he's ever given. He plays the ex-boyfriend to Lucy here, played by Dakota Johnson. And the entire movie is just this debate for her between her ex-boyfriend, played by Chris Evans, or Pedro Pascal, who's just like the most rich, perfect guy ever. It's one of those movies that I feel like thinks it's really deep and profound, but it's really just as cliche and shallow as the people it's making fun of. Not a bad movie, but definitely not great. At number 7 is Pixar's Elio. This movie has been an absolute flop, but it's a pretty fine middle-of-the-road Pixar movie. It's about this kid Elio who gets abducted by aliens, and they mistake him as the ambassador for Earth. I'll admit, I'm not the biggest fan of this like character design art style they have going on. I feel like Pixar has been reusing this so often, but the movie overall does look incredible. Obviously, the animation's always great, and the use of colors in this movie is really just beautiful. And it's really just a sci-fi kind of found family movie that has some really sweet moments, some good moments of humor too, but I feel like it really depends on how much you relate to Elio for how much you're gonna really like this movie. For me, it was just kind of a fine film. Number 6 is Wes Anderson's newest movie, The Phoenician Scheme. I am a huge fan of Wes Anderson's films, and I did really like this movie, but I do sadly think it's one of his weaker films. Like, there's elements of this I really love. He has that classic Wes Anderson visual style, obviously. That quirky, sarcastic humor is here times a million. If you don't know, it's about this rich businessman pretty much that's trying to make his nun daughter his sole heir to his business empire, and obviously they have very conflicting morals. Adding Michael Cera to a Wes Anderson movie was a stroke of genius. I don't know how it took that long to do it, and there's really good performances in this film. I simply think all the characters are really underdeveloped and flat. I really didn't care for or connect to any of them in the movie. That's why it's not higher for me, but an enjoyable time. If you're enjoying the video, drop a like real quick. But at number 5 might be the movie I'm the most conflicted on of the entire year so far, and that is 28 Years Later, because there are legitimately amazing sequences in this film that I absolutely love. I think the first hour is legitimately a masterpiece. For everything I love about the movie, the second half, while it does have some really beautiful moments in it, is definitely way weaker overall. Feels like a completely different film, and then the ending is just so incredibly jarring that it just completely took me out of it. Now, I'm trying to be a little bit more objective on it and just take away my hate of the very final scene and say yeah, this was a good movie overall, but I am really hoping that 28 Years Later Part 2 that comes out in January does not have the tone of that last scene, and it's more similar to the stuff we saw earlier in this movie. This movie does give us a really good Aaron Taylor Johnson performance, and his son, played by Alfie Williams, his character name is Spike. This kid's like the lead of the movie. It's his first ever acting credit, and he did absolutely incredible. At 4th place is a live action How to Train Your Dragon film, which is always just so weird to rank and review because yeah, we've already seen this movie over 10 years ago. It's the same exact thing almost as the original animated film, just in live action. But doing a live action remake is already a lazy and useless thing to do, so I'd rather them just take the same exact story and give you another good movie rather than just completely butcher it and change the meaning of the story like Lilo and Stitch did. And this film, I think, did a good job at capturing a lot of the original magic. That same music's in there. Toothless looks incredible. I like all the new members of the cast playing these classic characters. If you enjoyed the original How to Train Your Dragon movie as a kid, I think it's pretty impossible to not enjoy this because, like I said, it's basically the same thing. At number 3, we're getting to the really good stuff though. We got The Life of Chuck. This is based on a Stephen King story and directed by Mike Flanagan, who are both known for their horror works, but this movie's not horror at all. Instead, this movie's simply just about the entire life and death of this regular guy Chuck from when he's a kid to his death day. The movie does it in a very unorthodox way, and for the first 30 minutes of the film, you're gonna be like, what on earth is happening in this film? How on earth is this about a guy named Chuck? But if you just let the movie take its time to tell its story, it all comes together in such a beautiful way. Great performances all over the place in this movie. Tom Hiddleston obviously is great as Chuck. Mark Hamill plays Chuck's grandfather. This is legitimately one of my favorite supporting performances of the year, and I just love Mark Hamill. I hope he gets a Best Supporting Actor nomination nomination for this at the Oscars next year. At number 2, I'm going with F1, Brad Pitt's newest racing movie. I'm not a fan of Formula One racing whatsoever, but this movie was an absolute blast. Brad Pitt plays Sonny Hayes, who's this old retired F1 driver that's called back into it by an old friend of his to join his F1 team. And yeah, it's kind of your cliche typical sports story of like the older, grumpier guy kind of comes in to coach up the young, super talented rookie, but he has way too big of an ego. The movie looks gorgeous. The sound design and races were absolutely incredible. Like, there's so many different races in this movie, but they're all super memorable or have one standout scene, really. You got a great Hans Zimmer score in this. It's probably like 10 to 15 minutes too long, I'm not gonna lie, but otherwise an absolute blast of a film. And at number 1, I'm going with Ballerina, which I'm not gonna lie, probably has a worse story than F1. It's just a very simple revenge plot. But I come to the John Wick franchise for insane action, and Ballerina has no shortage of it. So many standout fight scenes, like one in the nightclub, there's a grenade sequence and a flamethrower sequence that are all just absolutely incredible. I also think Ana de Armas was great as Eve. Of course, seeing Keanu back as John Wick is always awesome. But those top 2 are really close to being switched around. It kind of depends on my mood, but let me know your ranking of any new movies you saw in June from worst to best. I got to see Jurassic World Rebirth early. If you want to see my review of that movie, click the video at the top of the screen, or if you want to see all my previous month rankings from January to May, click the playlist at the bottom, and thank you for watching.